Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 618. Today we're going to talk about Time of Crisis from GMT Games. Before I start though, some of you may say, Joel, you said you were not going to do video reviews anymore, which is not what I said. I said I was taking a break, which I've done. It's been over 3 months since I did a sort of straight up video review. I will say I have been doing podcasts every month for the last few months. I have talked about this game prior to that on a podcast that came out in January, February, I don't remember exactly what. And I've also been kind of plumbing the depths and soul searching and doing all kinds of things for the last several months, actually going back to last year, and figuring out what people want, what I want from a review. And so the reviews are going to change up a little bit. These first couple might be a little bit rusty. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do sort of a podcast every month and a review every month until I change my mind in 3 to 6 months. Anyway, so that's what my plan is to do right now. And I'm going to take kind of the highlight game from that month, give or take a few days or weeks or whatever. And I'm going to take that. So I'm going to catch up a little bit. You're going to see 3 videos kind of come out here over the next few days or so, weeks or so. And so the first one was kind of my highlight from January, which had sort of competed with Pandemic Legacy Season 2 back and forth. But this one kind of won out at this moment in time. So I'm going to go over this. And there was a few things, I know this is a long preamble, but there's a few things that some people, or a lot of people I should say, said, you got to have this in a review for me. This is what I need. And these are just 3 like nuts and bolts things. So the first one is player count. How does it play at different player counts? How long does it take to play? Maybe that varies at different player counts. And then also compare it to other games, which I have a philosophical issue with, but I'm going to do that because it's okay. There's no harm, and sometimes I do it and sometimes I don't when I feel it's appropriate. And then those are the 3 things: player count, player time, and then compare it to some other games, what it might be like, or compare, contrast, all that. And then I'm also basically, what I'm going to do with these reviews is tell you how special it is to me and why it's special, why I singled it out from that month. So like I said, you're going to see 3 reviews kind of come out here over the next few days and so on. But anyway, enough of that preamble nonsense. Sorry I had to do that, because if you're watching this in 3 years, you're like, what is he talking about? I don't care. Anyway, let's talk about Time of Crisis, and we'll jump into that. It is a game about the sort of fall of the Roman Empire. As you can see, you've got a map, you got player boards, you got special chits that you're moving around, and you have this cool kind of deck building mechanic that's sort of deck building, but not really. So let's jump down, look at some components. We'll kind of go into it. It's going to be different than from before, so we'll see how this goes, but I'm going to work out the kinks, so let's go. Okay, so here is the main player board. It's pretty big, so I can't get it all into the frame there. And this is nice. It's pretty. It's got lots of, you can see big open spaces to move your troops around. And so you'll have like little generals out here and little governors in these different spaces, and you'll be moving kind of these stacks of troops around and stuff like that. But this is not necessarily the most important part. What you're going to want to look at here is these player sheets here. And this is actually a good summary of all of the rules of the game. And you can see there's different colored actions, red, blue, and yellow. And you're going to get these cards, and these are kind of like your starting deck here. So you can see I've got some blue ones, some yellow ones, and some red ones. And you're going to you're not even going to shuffle these up. You're just going to set these here in the available pile. And then at the end of your turn, or to start the game, you're going to just rifle through here and say, I'm going to choose these 5 cards. And you're always going to choose 5 cards, and then this kind of dictates the types of actions and sort of how well and how awesome you can do them on your turn. So right now I'm going to be doing a lot of blue actions with maybe a couple of yellow actions. Whereas if I chose these cards here, like that, let's say that, we do a lot of military red actions with a little bit of splash of other actions there. Now once you play the cards, you're going to then put them in your discard pile. And then once you get to the point where you can't draw 5, so in this case, I'm only drawing 4. You take all these cards here, and then you can take and put them over there, and then you grab 1 card out of here of your choice, and then that will dictate your turn. So maybe you spend all your military actions, in your first turn, moving troops around, deploying new troops, and so on, maybe recruiting generals or something. But then if you've played all your red cards, you're not going to be able to do that again for some time, especially as your deck gets bigger. So you've also got these other cards here that you can purchase. And you can see these are sort of like level 2s of red, yellow, and blue. And then it goes all the way up to level 4. So you've got some level 3s and 4s here that you can purchase. And these are all the same. So all the level 4s are all the same. These are going to give you a different influence points that you can play. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then also, they're also going to give you a special ability on top of that. It's not an either or type of thing. So you're going to choose to play the cards, and then you're going to get the influence points and then take certain actions. Like I said, red actions are military. These blue actions are Senate. So these are going to get governors. And the governors, like I showed you on the board here, they're going to go in the central spot. And you're going to have a certain amount, it's going to go here. And this is going to give you like the amount of influence that you have. And certain things and events that are going to happen that are going to drop down your influence. And if you ever go to 0, it's going to revert back to neutral. And other players can come and sort of like force an election and play, again, blue cards to give them more dice to roll as they try to capture this from you. They don't even have to have military here. If they do, that's going to, affect their dice rolling and the odds and everything like that. But they basically have to double your influence score, give or take some modifiers. And you can also like spend yellow actions to build certain kinds of buildings. These are just going to give you little special abilities. There's 3 different kinds of buildings. They even have the effect there printed on the back, which is really small, but you can look and see what that does. And so you've got kind of this interesting also sort of connection with Rome. Now Rome's going to start off neutral, and depending on how many sort of neutral areas there are, it's going to be based on the player count. They're going to have a certain number of influence based on the number of neutral areas. So if we start the game and there's 6 areas that are not controlled by players, each player is going to start out controlling 1 area, then it'll be at 6. But this is very quickly going to fall. So whatever Roman emperor that is currently in there, they have really no sort of grasp or control of the empire as a whole. It's very quickly going to drop to 0, and it's going to be very susceptible then to be taken over, like I said, by a player playing blue actions, rolling dice for the amount of blue influence they have, and then taking it over. And then at that point, this is going to be then set to however many areas that player controls. So you don't want to go in there, very early unless you have sort of built up influence in all of the different regions that you possibly can. And then you want to kind of try to move in there. So there's a real kind of cool dynamic of Rome being sort of very volatile and hard to get and hard to keep control of more than anything. But you're going to score victory points every round based on the different areas that you control, and then you also get some extra points for controlling Rome, or Italia in this case, itself. And the other really cool thing is that you're going to get money, sort of like an income at the end of the round, and that's going to be done by adding up all of the influence. So let's say you had, let's see here, you had some there, and the guy down here, and this guy here. And so you would add up the influence of 3 plus 2 is 5, and then let's say this was 3. So you'd have 8 influence points. Well, that would allow you to buy these cards. So if you can say, oh, cool, I can buy 2 4s. Well, not quite. And you can see here, I actually only control 3 regions. So any card that is 3 or less, the number of regions I control or less is going to be its face value. So that's 3. Anything over that amount, so of course these 4, I only control 3. So the 4s are actually double. So these cost me 8. So I could actually only buy 1 of these. So there's a very interesting dynamic here between sort of focusing and building up influence and getting the populace friendly with you in a single spot, give you kind of more money. But to be able to get access to those higher impact cards, you also need to spread out. So there's a real sort of dynamic tension between focusing on an area, maybe building up military here, versus kind of spreading out. So there's a real impetus to spread out and then also do both. And then by having the impetus to spread out, you're going to run into other players. So that's a cool way. And this is the thing that's special about the game to me, is everything is kind of driven by these cards here. And these cards are going to do cool special effects and things. You can get different things that will, like, let's see here. This is a pretender. So once you control, I believe it's 2 or 3 or more adjacent regions, or 2 regions that have 3 or more influence, you can play the pretender card, and then that will sort of sap the level of victory points that the emperor is going to get. There's all cool kind of dynamics like that in some of the different cards. There's also going to be like barbarians that come in here, and these are going to be closed off based on the number of players. So not all of these different regions will be active in terms of barbarians, or even able to take control of, like Africa maybe won't be in play. And that's going to be based on the number of players. So it is going to scale based on the number of players. The other thing that's going to scale based on the number of players is this events table here. So you can see you have different barbarian tribes that are going to possibly invade. Now this is for 4 players, so if I go and find the 2-player table here, you can see we're going to kind of reduce that, and we don't have as many options because only the active barbarians are going to be there. And there's also, you can see here, a number 7 is going to be an event. Now every turn, every single player's turn, so my turn, then your turn, we're going to roll these dice, and then you're going to look and see who invades, maybe some other event like so, or we're going to have to actually pull a card from the event deck, which is right here. Now don't be scared about this event deck because the effects are not like over the top crazy. Let's just look at a random one here. This one says we're going to place the Ardashir counter, and this is sort of a barbarian leader that's going to come in. This one here is going to be barbarian raiding parties. This is going to affect sort of the path that the barbarians come into. So this is another little interesting tidbit. So as you start to kind of roll the events, so let's say we roll the events for the Goths, that means we're going to put in a new barbarian, then you're going to re-roll the dice, and if the black die that you roll is equal to or less than the number of barbarians that have accrued here, so it may take a couple of rolls to actually get them to activate, then you're going to take a look at the white die, and then you're going to move them down a certain path. So it's either going to come in, down this way or over that way. Now, getting back to the events, there is a sort of end game event card. I believe it's like in the last 3 or 4 cards when you shuffle it up. So if that comes out, then that will end the game, which it's gotten close in the games that I've played. The other way that it's ended, and the only way that I've seen it end, is if you're playing a short game and a player hits 40 points and is, down here, still controls Italia, then that will trigger the end of the game. But the full game is actually getting to 60 points. So you wrap up to 40 and go back to 20. And then that will trigger the end game there. Then you're going to count up how many turns someone has been emperor. So you can see we keep track of the points that you're going to score every round. Again, you get points for controlling regions and also winning battles, I should say. And if somebody controls Italia, they're going to start to move their other little counter up. So whoever's controlled Italia for the most rounds is going to get a bonus of 10 points. So maybe I controlled it for 5 rounds, and then you got it at the very end, but you only controlled for maybe 1 or 2 rounds, so you're going to get less points than me in terms of that. So you're going to get a little bit of a bonus there. You can really see who the leader is and try to gang up on them and stuff like that. If you can, if you've managed your hand of cards right. But that's kind of the general summary of the game. Okay, so that's sort of a general overview of the game. So let's go through the nuts and bolts of it. I've played this 2, 3, and 4 players. I will say that the best player count is 4. It's just you have a lot of sort of vying factions, sort of cooperation. I'll leave you alone if you leave me alone. And you've just got a lot of sort of angles and everything you have to watch on the map itself. But it still plays really, really well at 2-player. I would play this 2-player any day. It's just I prefer it with 4. So I think if you're going to get this for 2, 3, or 4 player experience, if your group is a certain player count all the time, then you could get this for any. The map itself scales, as I said. You kind of cordon off areas that aren't active, and you don't activate every barbarian tribe when you're playing with 2 players. But there's a really good kind of back and forth give and take with with a 2-player game. So the other nuts and bolts is the time length. Certainly when you play with 4 players, it's going to take longer, but the game, it depends on how many times you played it, but I could see games, depending on the player count, going from like maybe 1.5 hours to 3 hours. Maybe a first play with all 4 players would go up to maybe 4 hours. It just kind of depends. The game is going to end quicker than you think. And like I said, you can play a short game to 40 points or a full game to 60 points. And I've only played to 60 with 2 players. But that was over Vassal, so that's like an online tool that you can play. So that was hard to gauge because it was like turn-based and everything. But yeah, I think 60 points, 4 players, you might be itching to get up to 4 hours with that. The thing that I would compare this to, gosh, this is tough. This is why I don't like to always compare it to a game, because, okay, it's sort of like maybe a super light version of Virgin Queen or Here I Stand, but I have not played either of those. But it feels sort of like that, where you've got kind of card-driven, some area control types of things, a little bit of battles, some special effects on the cards. Yeah, but I don't think it's really like those. But I think if you like that style of game, you'd probably get into this as sort of a lighter sort of endeavor for that style. What I would say with this, and the reason I wanted to feature it, and what makes it super special to me is I think this is accessible enough. The rules are clear enough for the most part. We actually found out the first time we played it, we did something slightly wrong with one of the cards. It's because, I'll tell you, it's the number 2 blue card, and it basically allows you to flip down barbarians and deactivate them as they come in. And so we were actually going into a barbarian sort of home region and then doing it there as they sort of came up and were active. So you can't do that. You can't go in there and do that. It has to be one of the regions outside of that. And it's like the difference between a region and a zone or something. And if you read the card, you're like, oh, well, that doesn't mean what we think it means. I think that was the only real issue we had, and that was just a reading thing and a wording thing. So I think if you're not into war games or these big GMT games, I still think this is a good one to take a look at. Now, the whole deck building piece of it, where you choose your cards and then you move on to you discard them, then you grab the cards that you still have left over. That's awesome. There's so much like theme just like packed in and just woven into the entire game board and the cards and how all that goes. And if you look back at the game overview, the breadth of regions that you cover versus how much you focus influence in the different regions is going to tie into the cost of the cards. And you can be able to get access to different cards, and then as you spread out, there's a dynamic in terms of affecting the victory points of whoever controls Rome if you install a pretend emperor and stuff like that. And then the barbarians really kind of add like a random sort of dynamic, but they're not too random, and the event cards aren't too random. They're just something. I mean, Rome is crumbling, right? So you have to sort of not just worry about the other players, but worry about sort of the maintenance and things like that. Like you can play cards that will put in sort of a disgruntled riot of people, and you've got to kind of manage that. But it's not overdone, because once it's in there, it's going to kind of grow and spread, but nobody else can kind of double down on that. There's just like a lot of really sort of smart design and balanced decisions on all the different cards, and everything is just so well integrated, and just, everything's like tied to the hip. The card price, the areas, everything, and just the way that the dynamics of the different buildings work, that just give you little adjustments to kind of combat some of those different events and deactivate barbarians or tamp down riots for you in a way. And so but it's just a very simple little building that just adjusts its value basically by 1 or deactivate something, and it ties back into, again, focusing in sort of building up your influence within a region, because you're going to spend, again, those yellow actions, those sort of civic types of actions or populist actions that are focused on one region versus spreading out your military. The combat is dice driven. It's very simple. You just have your 2 hit number on the chit. So if you have a guy that's like a military unit, it's going to hit on a 3+, and then if he gets hit or takes damage, you flip it over, and now he's hitting on a 5+, and all that. So, but the game is very open and free form and dynamic, so you can kind of build up and send armies one way or the other, or leave a militia installed. But people can then come in, if you sort of ignore, the populist actions, they can come in and try to, have an election to kind of force you out while you sort of have these military out and about. So it's very sort of tied to the theme that way in terms of the way communication kind of happens, the way you can kind of subvert somebody at court while their military is out over here doing something else. So I like that. That kind of reminds me of Game of Thrones, where you've got these military battles and dragons fighting each other, but then the Lannisters are totally screwing you at court. And that stuff's happening. That's also just as important as this ultra violent physical part of it. There's the whole kind of mental diabolical side of it. So I think that's a good summary of all the different things and the stuff that I like about this game. Like I said, I would definitely take a look at this, even if you're not into like a war game per se. There's just a lot to really sort of unpack and revisit here. And like I said, it plays great at all the different player counts. So that is Time of Crisis. Thank you.